What's better than rocking out to your favorite songs at top volume with no one around to judge you? Rocking out while blasting your enemies into oblivion. Enter Symphony, a rhythmic top-down shooter by indie developer Empty Clip Studios. The same team behind spin-off titles like Dead Island Retro Revenge, NHL 94 Rewind, A King's Tale Final Fantasy 15, and just announced more recently, the remaster of the original Gargoyles video game. Released in 2012 for PC, Symphony was Empty Clip's answer to popular games like Audio Surf and Beat Hazard, which also used the music to drive gameplay. And just like Beat Hazard, the quality of the soundtrack in Symphony depends heavily on how cool your own personal music library is. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another brand new episode of the Completionist New Game Plus, the show where I am revisiting the first 120 games I ever featured here on the channel. For this episode, we're diving back into originally my 37th game on the channel, a game that combines two of my favorite things, music and mayhem. And as we all know, I have killer taste in music, so for me, playing this game meant I got to listen to one banger after another while blowing stuff up in a really cool cybernetic space. Not bad, Flawless J. Not bad at all. Let's rock!
And the battle continues! This could turn it all around! This bout will determine who is the strongest once and for all!
Hey everyone, Indyland 2022 tickets are available right now. It is in person in Hollywood, California. You can see me and a bunch of awesome creators play awesome games in the sake and honor of charity while raising a bunch of money. It's gonna be a fun time. Come see us in the Bourbon Room in Hollywood, November 11th through the 13th. Come on down, just get on. I'll give you a COVID-safe hug. The first time I played Symphony, it was for a short-lived series called Here Comes a New Challenger. There's only 2 episodes, one on Symphony and one on Far Cry 3. The show was all about showcasing new games and not even completing them. It was about playing a game I've never played before, jumping in with my brand new thoughts, and then asking you all at home if I should complete it or not. It was designed so that I wouldn't have to burn myself out completing games all the time. Unfortunately, I learned quickly that you guys hated that. And when I say you guys, I mean the general you, not you watching this video right now. Now, originally, I only played about 5 to 8 hours of Symphony before covering it around the time. So completing it for this episode felt less like an encore and more like a whole new concert. That's right. This is one of those special games out there on New Game Plus that has never received a rating before. Little has changed about Symphony since its initial release. Bugs have been fixed, tweaks have been made to allow for things like unlimited song length and controller support, but otherwise, it's basically the same tune Empty Clip was whistling when the game first hit Steam. Symphony's narrative is simple. Something evil with a capital E has wormed its way into your music library, capturing several famous composers and enslaving them to its will. And it is now slowly corrupting your collection of 6 sweet beats. Your job is to defeat the big bad's army of minions, as well as several demonic bosses, in order to free the composers and save your music. Now, to someone who spent way too many quarters on top-down shoot-em-ups like Galaga and Asteroids back in the day, the basic setup of Symphony feels more than a little nostalgic. You control a spaceship which you use to blast, dare we call them invaders, to itty-bitty pieces. From their wrecks, you salvage inspiration, the game's currency, as well as ship health. You have infinite lives, but each revival costs inspiration, which you need to rack up to complete the score targets for each level. Surpassing these targets gains you kudos, another form of currency, and helps unlock a unique weapon for your ship. Between levels, you can customize your ship with these weapons and upgrade them using inspiration and kudos. So at the start of the game, you have the option to import your own music to play through, one song at a time. The game then procedurally generates the rhythm of each level based on the song. So if you want to blast bad guys down while headbanging to System of a Down, you absolutely can. If you want to send them to the moon to the tune of your favorite beats by Onomatoguchi, hell yeah you can. If you want to annihilate your enemies while singing along the soundtrack from Encanto, I Yes, you could do that too. Progress through the game is represented by 5 Symphony pages. Each difficulty, except for the last, includes 3 boss battles, 1 for each piece of a single page. Beating all 3 bosses finishes the page, which unlocks the next higher difficulty. Finishing all 5 pages unlocks the 6th and final difficulty, which culminates in a single epic boss battle with the big bad himself. Beating him essentially means beating the game. Now, my first impression of Symphony was pretty positive. Yeah, it wasn't the first nor the last game to generate gameplay based on a customizable soundtrack. The graphics at the time looked sleek and shiny, and the rhythm felt right. It wasn't long before I was singing along out loud my favorite tracks while bobbing and weaving between enemy ships like a bat out of hell. It had a heck of a lot of potential, and back when I made the original episode, I was eager to get many eyes on it as I could. But that was then, and this is now. A decade later, I am revisiting Symphony, and the question is, am I still dancing to its beat? So when I first played Symphony, I imagined it as infinitely replayable. And in a way, it is. The longer your playlist, the longer you can keep rocking. Every level will look and feel a little different no matter how many melodies you throw at it. To keep things fresh when I played it this time around, I included some new music as well as some old favorites, including a few of our catchiest Big Bad Bosses tracks. So technically, I was singing along with myself for some of the time. Hey, that's a step up from talking to myself, right? The change I was probably most excited about was the new controller support that I mentioned. Initially, the game was only allowed with mouse and keyboard. For this kind of game, not my cup of tea. Playing with a controller feels a lot better. Now, one mistake a lot of games like Symphony make is to clutter the screen up with too many baddies and things that go boom. Yet, despite being procedurally generated, the chaos in Symphony always feels controlled. Believe me, things get hairy as hell once you start hitting the higher difficulties. But there's a melody to the madness that keeps all that action from becoming impossible to navigate. Smooth neon graphics walk the line between nostalgically retro and stylishly futuristic. They make for a pretty rad light show once you pump the music up and equip some of the cool rare weapons like the subwoofer, which gets more powerful with faster tempos. Symphony is single player only, though if you like to jam competitively, you can create an account and compare your scores to those of other players on the online leaderboards. I will say, in my time with the game, I could not get that to work. Makes sense because I'm sure no one's playing this game anymore. It's an older game. The controls are simple. Move your ship with the mouse or your controller stick and hit right or left buttons to fire left or right weapons. The simplicity here is 100% intentional. It lets you focus on the real challenge, dancing around death and blasting legions of enemies sky high, all while belting out the words to songs you forgot you knew by heart. Symphony is a rockin' good time at first, but playing too long is like listening to your song of the week on repeat. At first, you can't go enough without it. You're humming along under your breath, even though you're not listening to it, trying not to bop your head to the beat only you can hear so that people don't give you that look they reserve for the guy who talks to his toenails in the subway. Even when it starts to get old, you keep playing it, chasing that serotonin rush of love you felt when you first heard it. But by the end of the week, the affair is over. You can't stand that song anymore. You played it well past its expiration date, but you can't get it out of your head, and now you are the guy in the subway talking to his toenails. And yeah, the song was Call Me Maybe by Carly Rae Jepsen. Come at me. Okay, maybe it's not that extreme, but you do get the idea here. At first, Symphony was a blast to play. By the 14th hour, however, it was starting to wear out its welcome. And by hour 25 or so, I wasn't sure I ever wanted to listen to Eggman ever again. Never mind. Nope, still good. Nothing can ruin that for me. Now, the biggest problem that Symphony has is that it is a narrative adventure confounded to procedurally generated gameplay, which usually means that, hey, there should be more modes, more bosses, more collectibles, more weapons, more items. All of those things I just talked about get solved really early on in the process of playing this game. Beating this game is a pretty short trip. Completing it, however, is a whole other beast. Symphony is an exercise in creative iteration. It took a popular trope and expanded upon it. Although perhaps not perfectly executed, the idea of a procedurally generated rhythm game, especially one that relies on user input to create a uniquely personalized experience, is really cool. It's always good to see studios trying new things, and just as importantly, learning from them. By the end of the game, I was exhausted. Symphony is that kind of game that requires rapt concentration from one level to the next, especially for complete completionists. Still, when it's all said and done, I am glad that I did complete it. I'm happy to have completed it, and I am thankful that it does exist. Completing Symphony meant beating the game and completing all of the Steam achievements. Luckily, most of the achievements for Symphony were pretty reasonable asks. Several were tied into normal story progression, like unlocking the different difficulties. But a few of the other crazier ones, like playing a perfect game without taking any damage at the hardest possible difficulty, were challenging to say the least. Others were difficult per se, but took some time to complete due to the element of randomness in the game. Collecting certain items like the rare sonic weapon, for example, requires some patience because you cannot predict or control when you'll get one item versus another. It's complete RNG when it comes to unlocking all of the gear. Completing the game does, however, require a minimum of at least 14 hours of gameplay. Literally, one of the achievements is to play for at least 840 minutes. An allusion to an infamous musical work from the 1800s called Vexations that instructed musicians to repeat a motif 840 times. So basically, the Victorian era version of a BS Steam achievement. Love them or hate them, the achievements are the biggest motivator for continuing to progress through Symphony. The story isn't all that engaging, and there's not anything particularly memorable about the bosses or the main villain either. Music is the key factor here between levels. Everything else just feels kinda samey. And if we're being honest, you, the player, decide what you get to play. Depending on the music, the tracks, the difficulty, you kind of determine how you play this game, which is kind of cool. While I completed Symphony, there were 25 hours of total playtime. Dozens and dozens of rockin' singing along sessions, 6 difficulties to master, 16 boss battles to bop to, 31 achievements to complete, and 12 times I caught myself toe tapping after walking away from a play session.
Symphony is fun, but it's an experience best kept short and sweet. The achievements give you something to work towards, but by the end, they feel more like a checklist than an epic quest log. You're completing them just so you can cross them off a list. So if you're into endless operas, maybe completing this game is for you. But for the rest of us, a regular length concert will do. So, with that in mind, guys, I'm giving this game its completionist rating of play it.
Play it.